China has vowed to retaliate at countries imposing mandatory COVID testing for incoming travellers, labelling the move unacceptable. It comes after Australia joined more than a dozen nations this week in implementing new entry restrictions on Chinese nationals, despite the Chief Medical Officer saying the rules weren't necessary. Joining me now is Nationals leader David Littleproud. Thank you so much for joining us. Firstly, what do you make of these comments by China this morning?
Yeah, well, obviously they're looking for an explanation, and I think the Australian people want an explanation. Labor's lost control of this. When you've got the Chief Medical Officer at odds with the Health Minister, and then the Health Minister goes into hiding instead of coming out and giving an explanation as to why he made a decision against what the Chief Medical Officer had advised him, then I think there's an explanation required. That's what a responsible government does. Now, we stuck by the principle we should listen to the Chief Medical Officer's advice. That's the best advice you can get as a government. But this government seems to think they're not going to do that. They're not going to give an explanation why. Now, if there's a reason, we're all ears. And I think even the Chinese would be all ears. But I would have thought also that if a country had put these restrictions on us, then we'd want an explanation if there was more information required. But we'd also want to know, what is the trigger points for this to be taken away? What is it that is required here? And that's where transparency with the Australian people is important, to rebuild that trust in the institutions, not just of government, but of the Chief Medical Officer. And I think the government has lost control of this, and they've got to do something very quick to rebuild that trust and confidence that we all need.
The previous coalition government always maintained that Australia needed to be firm when it came to our own needs, particularly when it came to China. So doesn't every country have the right to respond in its own way?
Oh, we do, but that's why it should be predicated on the science, and that science should be transparent. Now, we're saying if Mark Butler wants to step up and come out from hiding instead of staying away and giving an explanation, then I'm sure he'll be able to give a cogent argument as to why they've got to this decision contrary to the Chief Medical Officer. And I think that's what the Australian people would accept. And that's what he needs to do. So there's nothing untoward in this, and China, in fact, have imposed different restrictions on Australia with respect to COVID as well. So every country has their own sovereignty that should be respected, but there should also be a level of cooperation, because our aim should be to open up safely when we can, but we need to be open and transparent with one another to make sure we get that. And if we don't feel they're being transparent, well, tell them exactly what they need to provide. And I think that's the open, transparent dialogue that needs to happen, and it also needs to happen with the Australian people, because when the Chief Medical Officer is at odds with the Health Minister, then it starts to erode confidence in those institutions that, in times of crisis, particularly health crisis, we look to those Chief Medical Officers to give us the best advice. And this has just got away from Labor. They've lost control of it, and they need to take some leadership now and be upfront and clear with the Australian public about why they got this determination and what is the trigger of when it would be relaxed.
All right, let's move on now. You have this morning announced new appointments to the Nationals. Who will be replacing Andrew Gee?
Yeah, Darren Chester will come in and be the Regional Education, Regional Development, Local Government and Territories Shadow Minister. Darren's got extensive experience in this, but we want to focus in on particularly education, regional education. Darren's been a champion for country university centres, regional university centres, but also childcare. We've got a childcare crisis in regional rural Australia because the federal government spent $4.7 billion on subsidies, but not one extra place in regional areas. And if you live outside a capital city, it's not about affordability, it's actually about accessibility. You've got families that can't go back to work because they can't find a place. And you would have thought in $4.7 billion, they might have created one place in regional Australia so that families could pay the extra living requirements that this government's forced on them, the extra $2,000 that they had to come up with by Christmas in cost of living, in energy, in food, and in mortgage payments. You would have thought they would have invested some of that so families in regional Australia could have at least gone back to work to pay for some of it. But they left us cold and dry with nothing to do. And so this is why Darren will focus very much on childcare, as well as being able to say to young people, you don't have to go to capital cities to get a university degree. You can do it in a regional university centre, a country university centre in a small town. And that's a great move forward, and that's something the Nationals want to bring back to Canberra.
All right, we're running out of time, but just very quickly, the Indigenous Voice to Parliament Yes campaign is going to be ramping up in the next few weeks. The Nationals are against it. Will you be launching your own No campaign?
No, we've made it very clear. We've took a principled position. There is no malice in our decision. We don't believe that adding another layer of bureaucracy will close the gap, particularly in regional remote areas. When you've got a representative body that we've already had before and didn't work, a representative body of 20-odd people that would have to try and articulate the challenges and aspirations of those across hundreds of thousands of square kilometres where the disadvantage is the greatest in regional and remote areas, and whereby the solutions are unique to those communities is not going to work. And that's what we've said. We've taken a principled stand. There is no malice in this. And we already believe that there are 227 voices to Parliament for not only Indigenous Australians, but for every Australian. They're the senators and the members of Parliament that go to Canberra that represent their constituents openly, fairly, no matter their ethnicity. And I can say that the Nationals have no malice, but we want to close the gap, and we don't believe this will close the gap.
David Littleproud, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.